Imagine this. You open Twitter and see your favorite K-pop idol dressed in what looks like a Halloween costume of your culture. The comments are split. Half are saying it's just for fun. The other half are saying my culture is not your aesthetic. Where do you even draw that line?
And then a few videos later, you see another group using dance and fashion from a culture that isn't theirs. But this time, the original creators are credited, fans from that culture are commenting that they feel seen, and articles are calling it a respectful tribute.
So how can we see both of these exist in the same industry? That's what we're going to explore today.
Hey everyone, welcome to our podcast, Claim or Shame. I'm Natalie.
I'm Neve, and full transparency, I'm pretty new to the K-pop fandom, but I've been doing a deep dive for this project, reading academic articles and fan perspectives, and honestly, this topic is way more complex than I expected.
And I'm Haley. Today we're diving into a very messy, very important topic in K-pop. Where is the line between cultural appropriation and appreciation?
Our research question is, what distinguishes cultural appropriation from cultural appreciation in K-pop? And how do industry practices, fan responses, and power dynamics shape these distinctions?
And our thesis or our argument is that the line between appropriation and appreciation comes down to six key factors: credit and acknowledgement, contextual understanding, power dynamics, respectful representation, community impact, and response to criticism. We'll demonstrate this by analyzing two cases from 2018, Twice's Geo Halloween costume and BTS's Idol.
We chose these two cases because they happened around the same time, both in 2018, but represented very different approaches to cultural borrowing. Twice's Jihyo wore a very controversial Halloween costume that many fans read as a stereotypical Native American outfit. Meanwhile, BTS's Idol era is often pointed to as an example of respectful cultural appreciation through African influences.
So basically, we've got two major groups. Twice from JYP Entertainment, one of the big three Korean companies, and BTS from HYBE, arguably the biggest K-pop act globally. Both massive platforms, both making cultural choices that reached millions of fans.
Exactly. This is why when they make these type of choices, whether it's a costume or choreography, the stakes are really high. It's not just one person's decision, it's broadcast to millions and shapes how cultures are perceived.
We're not just giving hot takes here. We built a set of criteria based on scholarly research and fan perspectives to evaluate both cases. We'll be asking, who gets credited? Who benefits? How do fans, especially fans of color, feel? And how do companies respond when they get called out?
I actually really appreciate this framework, guys. Because reading Cruz, So, and Scarabota's work on how fans self-authorize their engagement with K-pop despite problematic incidents, it made me realize how much emotional labor fans do trying to balance love for the music with calling out harm.
So before we jump into these cases, we'll give some backgrounds on the K-pop history with appropriation, define what we mean by cultural appropriation versus appreciation, introduce our six criteria, and then walk through our analysis of Twice and BTS.
Let's get into it, guys. Okay, to start, to understand why these debates are so intense, it helps to zoom out and look at how K-pop as an industry was built. K-pop didn't just appear out of nowhere in the 2010s. It actually has a very long and intensive history. One of the earliest prominent notable groups would be the Sotaji and Boys from the 1990s.
Mhm.
Scholars like Shin and Kim argue that big companies like SM, YG, and JYP are what they call market markers. They organize training, production, and global marketing in a really systematic way.
Yeah, and what really struck me while reading their work is how profit-driven the whole system is. These companies created the trainee system, where young people train for years before their debut, really focusing on creating polished products for global consumption. But cultural education about the communities they're borrowing from, that really wasn't prioritized in this process.
Exactly. And that helps explain why we see repeated issues around racism or cultural borrowing. The focus is on what sells globally, not on understanding the cultural implications of, say, wearing box braids or doing blackface.
And this brings us to Gil Soo Han's work. Han wrote extensively about blackface and acting black in Korean media, showing how these performances were normalized for years in comedy and music shows. Groups like Mamamoo performed in blackface at concerts. Even G-Dragon, a hugely influential artist, posted photos in blackface as a tribute to Trayvon Martin, which is deeply problematic on multiple levels.
Crazy.
This is also seen in Han's concept of nouveau riche nationalism, which really helped me understand the context of Korea's rapid economic rise, which created this cultural insularity where there wasn't an exposure to the histories of marginalization that other communities faced. But that really doesn't excuse their actions. It just explains the original structural problem.
Right. And at the same time, as Sarah Olutola points out in Fangirling All Black, Black American music, fashion, and dance are built into K-pop's DNA. Hip-hop beats, R&B vocal styles, and street dance. K-pop borrows heavily from Black culture based on this.
Although Olatola does a lot of what Natalie says, Olatola also shows that K-pop relies on Black performance styles, while Black fans often still feel excluded or stereotyped. So you get this contradiction. K-pop borrows a lot from marginalized cultures, but those same people can feel unwelcome, or harmed when they engage with the fandom or see how their culture is used.
And Haley, that contradiction is what really struck me in her article. Black fans were experiencing both liberation through the K-pop community and ongoing racism at the same time. It's not some either or scenario, it's both happening simultaneously, which is really exhausting.
And that's why fan reactions matter so much. Cruz, So, and Scaraboto wrote about how international fans self-authorize their engagement with K-pop. Basically, this means that they create moral justifications to keep loving K-pop even when it messes up. Things like, they're just learning, it's a cultural difference, or I'll call it out, but still stand.
That's the tension we're all working with as fans, trying to balance joy and ethics. Can you love something that also causes harm?
And I'm guessing that's where our criteria became crucial, to evaluate when something really crosses the line versus when it doesn't.
Exactly. Okay, so let's get our definitions clear. Cultural appropriation in our episode is when a more powerful group uses elements from marginalized culture, like, say, hairstyles, clothing, religious symbols, or music, without proper credit, context, or respect, especially when that culture has a history of being exploited or stereotyped.
So what you're saying is that it's basically borrowing without permission or understanding from a position of power, and often for profit or aesthetic purposes, while the people from that culture itself actually face discrimination for the same practices.
Right. Like black people get dress coded for wearing braids, but when a K-pop idol wears them, it's called trendy and edgy. That double standard is part of what makes it appropriation.
And cultural appreciation, on the other hand, is when there's like real effort to learn, credit, and respect the people and histories attached to those cultural elements. It usually involves explicit acknowledgement, consultation, collaboration, and trying not to reduce a living creature to just an aesthetic.
To add on to what Natalie said, appreciation asks, how did you do your homework? Like, did you credit the source? Are you engaging with the community respectfully? Or are you just taking what looks cool?
And it's almost like an academic citation, but for culture. You acknowledge where ideas and practices came from, and you engage with these source communities, not just extract what benefits you.
All right. Before we get into the cases, we should explain our six criteria and where they come from in our research.
Yeah, each one is based on specific scholars and fan sources, not just vibes. We actually did our research. So let's go through them.
Okay, to start off with criterion one, credit and acknowledgement. Here we're asking, does the group or company explicitly credit the origin or creators of what they're borrowing, like the dance style, the culture, or specific artists? And do they show respectful engagement, like collaborations or public statements?
We got this concept mainly from Sarah Olutola, who shows how K-pop leans on Black American styles, but often doesn't recognize Black creators or Black fans. and from our Reddit fan posts, where people say that being credited makes them feel seen instead of just used.
Right. And moving on to our second criteria, it's contextual understanding versus aesthetic borrowing. This one basically asks, is the cultural element used with real understanding of its history and social meaning, or mostly because it looks cool or sells well? Do the music video, lyrics, or promotion show any research or consultation?
Now, this criterion is grounded in Gil Han's analysis of blackface and acting black in Korean media, where blackness is used as a performance without historical context. And this is also seen Ul Uluto sorry, Ulutola's point that blackness often becomes a vibe or aesthetic in K-pop instead of a history.
This kind of shifts into our third criterion, being power dynamics and profit. Here we look at who benefits financially, socially, and in reputation from the borrowing. Are marginalized communities part of the rewards, or are they excluded while big companies profit? And does this reinforce existing power imbalances?
We pulled this from Shin and Kim, who described the big K-pop companies as market makers that structure everything around profit and control, and from Cruz, So, and Scaraboto, who show K-pop as a commercial field where fans have to morally justify their consumption.
And now moving on to criterion 4, respectful representation. We ask, is the portrayal nuanced and accurate, or does it rely on stereotypes and caricatures, like blackface, exaggerated tribal gestures, or generic Indian costumes? And how do people from that culture say it feels?
This idea is mostly extracted from Han, who shows how blackface and acting black in Korean media turn racialized others into jokes instead of full people, and from our fan sources, where Native and Black fans explain that certain images feel mocking, not honoring.
Our criterion 5 says community impact and fan response. This is about how fans, especially Black fans and other fans of color, respond. Do they feel respected, included, or do they feel hurt and exhausted? Is there meaningful dialogue or repair when people speak up?
We built this from Olutola's study of Black K-pop fans negotiating joy and racism, and from Cruz et al.'s idea of self-authorization, where fans constantly decided if they can keep supporting artists after appropriation incidents. Our Reddit threads on Jihyo and Idol are a big part of this too.
And finally, our sixth criterion is the response to criticism and calls for accountability. When people speak up, do these companies or artists respond with detailed and sincere apologies with real changes like cultural education or new policies, or do they just ignore it and give vague PR statements instead?
This builds on Han's observation that Korean media often respond weakly or late to race performances, on Shin and Kim's point that profit tends to come before reform, and on fan demands in Cruz Atal and Olutola for structural change, not just one-time statements.
So each part of our rubric comes from these scholars and fan voices. We're not just going with our gut, we're using their work to structure how we evaluate Twice and BTS.
This rubric really helps move beyond the I feel like this is wrong to here's why this is problematic based on these specific factors.
Yeah, exactly. We'll keep coming back to these six as we go through each case.
Alright, let's start with Twice and the Jihyo Halloween costume incident. This happened in October 2018 at Twice's Once Halloween fan meeting. It's basically a fan event celebrating Halloween and the third group's anniversary.
Each of the Twice members showed up wearing a Halloween costume. Jihyo wore a brown fringe dress, as you can see, a matching brown fur coat, face paint with various marks and slashes, pigtail braids, and a feathered head ornament.
And in a video that fans recorded and shared, she literally introduced herself by saying in Korean, but translated, as you can see, I am Indian Jiho in charge of MC. And then she did a stereotypical war cry gesture with her hand over her mouth. Hence the video here.
So I watched this clip preparing for this podcast, and the explicit Indian geo identification really undercuts any argument that this was unintentional or misunderstood. She knew what aesthetic she was going for clearly, as we can tell in the video.
Exactly. Initially, some fans tried to defend her by saying maybe she was trying to dress as Princess Mononoke from the Studio Ghibli film. But when the video came out with her explicitly saying Indian Jihyo, that defense fell apart.
And K-pop news sites like Koreaboo documented how fans immediately compared the outfit to stereotypical Native American Halloween costumes and pointing out how these reduce a stigmatized culture and a history of violence, genocide, and dispossession to a cute cosplay moment.
And what I found reading through fan responses is how personal this was for Native fans. It wasn't just something abstract. These people were saying, I was bullied from my culture, and now I'm seeing it just turned into a costume.
Yeah, right. On Reddit, specifically the r slash unpopular K-pop opinions subreddit, one native fan wrote, I still love Twice, but this costume looks like the same Indian Halloween costume outfit I was bullied for growing up. And I need someone to acknowledge that.
That's really powerful. This is a lived experience, not just being sensitive. And that brings us to fan spaces. On Reddit and Twitter, native and non-native fans called for an apology from Jiho and JYP Entertainment. Some posts explicitly said things like, I'm still a once, but I need acknowledgement and accountability.
Others tried to keep defending her by saying there was a lack of education in Korea about Native American issues. But showing intent through the Indian Jihyo video makes the they didn't know defense weaker.
So now let's apply our criteria and basically walk through it. Starting with criterion one, credit and acknowledgement. Was there any credit to actual native nations or any mention of the history, meaning behind traditional regalia?
Well, zero. There was none. It just presented it's just presented as a Halloween costume, an aesthetic choice with no context.
And I heard you say the term regalia, which clearly sounds important, right? It's not just an outfit, it refers to ceremonial clothing with deep spiritual significance. Feathers often represent honor in many Native communities. Using them as a costume, props, is fundamentally disrespectful.
You got that right. So criterion one, complete fail. No acknowledgement.
Now moving on to criterion two, contextual understanding versus aesthetic borrowing. Everything about the outfit and performance suggests it was chosen for aesthetic value. This looks like a fun Halloween look, with no sign of research or awareness of ongoing issues like the crisis of missing and murdered indigenous women, or the long history of Native people being caricatured in media.
So this was purely extractive, taking the look without any engagement with the meaning or the community.
In this case, criterion two, fail.
Now, criterion three, power dynamics and profit. Twice and JYP Entertainment absolutely benefited from the event and the overall brand. They sell tickets to fan meetings, build fan loyalty, and generate social media buzz. Native communities get no material benefit, and their cultural symbols are treated like props.
And JYP is a massive company with global reach, right? A costume choice on their official stage carries way more weight and visibility than a random person's Halloween party, which means greater responsibility.
And that power imbalance makes the lack of accountability even more glaring. They have resources for cultural consultants and education and just simply chose not to use them.
Yeah, considering all that, criterion three is a fail.
And now criterion four, respectful representation. Dressing as a generic Indian character and doing a war cry is textbook stereotyping. Like, tell me I'm not wrong. It flattens the incredible diversity of hundreds of distinct native nations into one monolithic, outdated image.
Yeah, exactly, Natalie. Fans from native backgrounds explicitly said that this feels like mockery or tribalization. One person on Twitter said, this is the exact costume that reduces my ancestors to Halloween props.
And Haley, that quote on Twitter is not just some hurt feelings. That's about an ongoing erasure and dehumanization of living communities.
So criterion four, Fail. Eh.
Yeah. And now, criterion five, community impact and fan response. A lot of fans expressed hurt and frustration. Some even organized email campaigns to JYP, sending messages to fan at JYP.com and business at JYP.com, asking for a formal apology and better cultural education. That's strong evidence of negative community impact.
Oh boy, and it wasn't just isolated. The Koreaboo article and Reddit threads show this was widespread, not a few complaints.
Well, when there is clear harm, there are definitely clear calls for accountability.
Yeah. So, according to Criterion 5, there was a strong negative impact.
And finally, criterion six, response to criticism and accountability. Did JYP offer a detailed public apology or explanation that acknowledged harm and promised change?
Well, Natalie, no. There was no major public statement, no apology from Jihyo or JYP that addressed the specific harm to Native communities. They're still waiting to this
Well,
day for a response.
dang, in that case, this fits exactly with what Han describes about Korean media's history with blackface and stereotypes. Silence or weak responses until international pressure becomes huge.
So without any company accountability, the pattern just repeats. The silence itself is really sending a message that Native fans' concerns do not matter.
And therefore, Criterion 6 is a fail. No.
Looking at all six criteria, we argue that this case is cultural appropriation. It fails on credit, context, representation, impact, and accountability. Even accounting for possible ignorance doesn't erase harm. So, we shame.
So guys, here's my question. If JYP had responded with a genuine apology plus consultation with Native organizations, would that have changed the evaluation of their actions?
Well, to answer your question, Eve, the initial harm would still be appropriation. But if JYP's company had a strong response, it would score better under accountability and could prevent future incidents. Response matters for growth.
Right. Our criteria doesn't erase initial harm, but it does measure whether learning happens afterwards. Oh my God, can you the silence was just deafening, like it's crazy. They still didn't respond.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so now looking at our second case study, we're going to be talking about BTS and Idol. From what I've read, this is held up as an example of appreciation done relatively well. Not perfect, but definitely significantly different in approach.
right. To be clear, this isn't saying BTS is perfect or has never had any controversies.
Yeah, Army, don't
But
come for us.
yeah, this specific case, the Idol music video and era from t August 2018, demonstrates what appreciation can look like, where there's intentional crediting and research.
And playing the music video, it basically blends, you can see, Korean cultural motifs with African diasporic influences.
Yeah,
Afrobeat rhythms, the South African Gora Gora dance, Nigerian Shaku Shaku dance, and Ankara style fashion.
So, multiple African cultures are represented here. South African, Nigerian, West African, all alongside Korean elements. That specificity already contrasts with Twice's generic Indian costume.
exactly. And writers from Just Add Color specifically highlight how Idol celebrates African and Korean fusion. The article describes the fiber-covered dancer who involve sorry, who invokes both Korean lion dance and several African dances. Senegalese kumpo, and I'm sorry if I pronounced this wrong, and kanfuran,
Hmm.
Afro Brazilian maracatu,
Maracatu, yeah.
maracatu.
So what stands out is that BTS and their team openly acknowledge those influences rather than pretending they invented them or calling it generic world music.
So when I was looking at the Reddit Bangtan thread, I read a few fan discussions where when the Gwar Gwar dance went viral, BTS and fans actively named South Africa as the origin, which pushed back against cultural erasure.
That explicit crediting is fundamental. It's the opposite of Twice's case, where there was zero acknowledgement. So let's start to walk through the six criterion for idol now.
All right, criterion one, credit and acknowledgement. There's explicit recognition of Gora Gora as South African, both in media coverage and in how BTS and fans discuss it.
Yeah, interviews and commentaries highlight African influences directly. BTS didn't rebrand it as just BTS choreography. They openly said they're incorporating this South African dance because they respect and admire it.
And Haley, that transparency is really crucial. They could have easily not mentioned it, and most casual viewers wouldn't have ever known, but they chose to credit them.
In this case, criterion one is a pass.
Okay, now criterion two, contextual understanding versus aesthetic. The Just Add Color article talks about how the choreography and styling comes from research fusion, treating African dance as powerful and joyful, woven alongside Korean symbolism.
Right, Haley. And it's not random borrowing or turning culture into a joke. It's elevated as part of a global celebration with attention to specific cultural origins.
So the research and respect is truly shown in their final product.
You got that right.
Therefore, criterion two is a pass.
And now criterion three, power dynamics and profit. BTS is hugely powerful, and profits massively from album sales, streams, tours, everything.
But Natalie, appreciation isn't about eliminating profit. It's about what you do with that power. Naming origins and framing moves as South African helps direct visibility back to source cultures instead of erasing them.
It's not perfect. There's still a clear power imbalance, but it's more ethical use of the platform. Appropriation erases and extracts. Appreciation acknowledges and amplifies.
Exactly. So criterion three leans towards appreciation. I think so.
Yeah, I agree. And now criterion four, respectful representation. No caricatures, no fake accents, no mocking, no flattening into stereotypes.
The diversity of influences, South African, Nigerian, Senegalese, Korean even, shows attention to, to specificity rather than homogenizing cultures.
So this is the complete opposite of Indian Geo, where everything got flattened into one generic stereotype.
Yeah, so criterion four is a pass in my book.
Exactly. And now criterion five, community impact and fan responses. This is where the contrast with Twice is the starkest. Like many fans from African and diaspora communities, they express pride on seeing their cultures on such a massive stage with credit.
Yeah, I saw one South African fan on Reddit and they wrote, seeing Gwara Gwara go viral with BTS, naming it made me feel so proud, not copied, and it felt like respect.
So instead of them being hurt by this dance, there's a celebration and cultural pride. It's not universal, as there are always different perspectives, but the dominant response is leaning towards positive.
Criterion five in this case is positive community impact.
And now finally, criterion six, response and accountability. BTS has publicly reflected on learning and growing regarding their relationship with Black music and other cultures.
And basically, RM has done interviews reflecting on their earlier work and understanding the responsibility that comes with borrowing from hip hop and Black culture. That ongoing reflection shows commitment beyond one video. Like, they've really grown.
So Natalie, it's kind of like more of a pattern, not just a one-time performance. That really matters for distinguishing appreciation from appropriation in our books.
Right.
Yeah, therefore, criterion six, strong accountability and growth.
So, we argue Idol is a strong example of cultural appreciation, scoring highly on credit, context, representation, community reception, and accountability. In this case, we claim.
So here's another little thought experiment. If BTS had used Gwar Gwar without naming it, would we still call this appreciation?
Well, to put it simply, no. Without credit, even good visuals fall back to appropriation. Credit is foundational.
Exactly. And now we're up to our fan community voices segment. And one crucial point we want to emphasize is Scholars and companies don't get the last word on these issues. Fans do. And they do enormous moral and emotional work around cultural appropriation and appreciation.
So, reading through some fan forums and threads, what really struck me is how fans navigate this tension constantly. Loving K-pop while calling out harm, educating other fans, organizing campaigns, deciding whether to keep supporting groups after controversies, and more.
Yeah, like with Twice's case, Reddit and Twitter posts from native and non-native fans show how deeply Indian Jihyo crossed the line. Some remained supportive of Jihyo but demanded JYP accountability. Others said repeated incidents make K-pop feel unsafe or exhausting as fans of color.
And one fan wrote, I love K-pop, but every time something like this happens, I have to decide if I'm going to keep investing emotionally in groups that don't seem to care about people like me. And honestly, I agree as someone who loves K-pop.
Yeah, and as someone new to K-pop, honestly, I agree too. And that emotional labor is invisible but constant. Olutolo's work really illuminated that for me, where Black fans experiencing K-pop see it as both a refuge and a site of harm simultaneously.
But now for BTS, fans discuss fan discussions show relief and pride when artists acknowledge origins. One black fan said, "When BTS cover credited Gwar it felt like they saw us, not just our culture as aesthetics, but us as people whose contributions matter."
Acknowledgement isn't symbolic, guys. It's about seeing and being seen and respected as full human beings, not just sources of cool aesthetics.
Yeah, and that's why fan responses are key to our criteria. When communities say this hurt, that really outweighs a company's statements about intent.
Intent doesn't erase impact. Fans feel the impact most directly.
So now looking at the big picture, we can see these cases side by side where the line between appropriation versus appreciation clearly isn't about one moment. It's really all six criteria working together: credit, context, power, representation, impact, and response.
Yeah, like with Twice's Jihyo's costume shows what happens without structural education and accountability in entertainment companies. Shin and Kim's profit focus explains why these patterns repeat.
But for BTS's Idol, it demonstrated that global K-pop acts can engage ethically with other cultures when they choose to do the work, like crediting, researching, reflecting, and listening.
So for anyone listening, whether you're a K-pop fan or not, the goal isn't canceling or excusing. It's asking better questions like who's represented, who profits, who's hurt, and what does respect really look like in the music industry?
For K-pop companies, our sources show ignorance can't be an excuse anymore. Real change requires cultural education, listening to fans of color, and transparent apologies when harm happens.
And now my turn to ask you guys a reflection question. Has this research changed how you personally approach K-pop or pop culture generally?
So for me, I think absolutely. I went from a casual observer to really understanding structural patterns. Now, when I see styling or choreography, I ask myself, is this respectful? Was credit given? And how would affected communities feel if they saw this?
Yeah, I would have to agree. I still love K-pop, but I recognize we can enjoy music while demanding better. Loving something doesn't mean pushing for growth. Loving something means pushing for growth, not accepting harm. But Natalie, I have to turn back that question to you.
Oh, well, exactly. I'd say that critical engagement and enjoyment aren't opposites. And I am very aware now of if companies and idols are respectful of if they take something from other cultures, and it affects how I view their music and them as people.
If you have, well, closing notes. If you have any thoughts on these cases or other K-pop appropriation and appreciation examples, we'd love to hear how you navigate that tension.
And whether you're new to K-pop like me or a longtime fan like Haley and Natalie, hopefully this framework can really help you think crucially and critically about culture and representation in all media, whether that's the music industry or anything else.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Thanks for
Thank
listening.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.